wrong direction again. All right, good afternoon. I'm Wright. Thanks so much for coming. So this is how I got involved with history. We moved here and bought an old house, and I was curious about who owned it. And this is an invitation to a barn warming party that took place in 1914 because their barn burned down. About a year later, they had a party. It's really fabulous. As an invitation, by the way, not that their barn burned down. And so we had the house. And so one day, this older couple drove up, and the fellow gets out, and he says, I was born in this house. And he was thrilled to find somebody that was interested in learning a little more about it. And so he came back, and he brought us not only this, but he brought us the newspaper clipping that reviewed the barn warming party, right? And it included things like, 100 cars lined Concord Road, and never has the Virginia reel been danced with such vigor. Right? So it was all great fun. Nothing special about the house, just an old house. But that kind of got me involved in our local historical society. And my background is kind of tech and startups and that sort of thing. And what I saw was that in kind of the humanities and history and so forth, some of the tools that I was used to were really not being used, right? Things like platforms and so forth. And there was also kind of a different attitude about sharing information and so forth. So I started thinking about kind of who owns history. And so I did this thing called Ignite. And some people may be familiar with the publisher O'Reilly. They do this kind of series of talks, kind of rapid fire talks. And so this was at MIT Media Lab, and I went and talked about kind of this question of why was it so easy to find popular culture and so forth online, but difficult to find interesting historical things. And I talked about some ideas like my own observation that when you look at platforms that are designed by people that come from kind of a library science, museum science background, those platforms take a certain nature and they're used on the orders of what? Hundreds of thousands of people, right? Maybe 1 million people. If you look at the platforms that are used by people that were designed by computer science folks, those platforms are all built around sharing, right? And so they're used by billions of people. So I started something called the History List, which was a platform for publishing information about history-related sites and events. And through that, met some people, including John Bell, and I saw John at an event, and I said, John, I've got this idea. I went to this tech thing called Bar Camp, and I think we could do it for history. And that kind of, some weeks elapsed, and I said, John, another thing. I said, well, John, well, what do you think? And what if we try it? And I think John's response was, well, we could try it. And we were headed to an event where Sam was and Elizabeth, Liz Covart, and so we kind of cornered them. And so we had 3 people that were willing to put up 2 or 3 talks apiece, and we published it online and kind of just got the word out. These guys have great social media presences and so forth, and so it sold out, right? So it was at the IBM kind of customer center in Cambridge. And that was the first year. And the next year, we go to the United South End Settlements, thanks to Nikki, who's not in this room, but it was kind of a last-minute venue, and it was a lot of kind of interesting and unique and a lot of fun. And that year, there was also the first time there was something called History Camp Iowa. I'm from Des Moines originally, and a fellow that works at the college I went to had seen it and said, I want to do History Camp Iowa. And so I flew out there, and we had some meetings, and so that was History Camp Iowa. So next year, we're back at United South End Settlement, and that was the first year there was History Camp Pioneer Valley. So Cliff, who is at the Springfield Museum, there's kind of a consortium of museums, historical societies in Western Massachusetts, and he said, we've been looking for an event, and we think this is a good format. So, why don't we kind of sit down and talk about what it might look like if we put together History Camp Pioneer Valley. And so that happened, and then Carrie, so everyone knows Carrie, or should, so that's why all the good stuff happened this year. So how did you find out about History Camp?
You want me to try that, Mike?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if this is on. I actually saw a...
So you know what? How about that? And this.
Okay, just stay right there. I'll stay here. Okay, I actually saw a tweet about it from Liz Kovart, and I texted my husband and I said, we have to go to Boston next month. And he says, oh, really? But he knows if I have a bee in my bonnet, we're going to do it. So I came out here because I had looked it up, looked at the website, and I'm like, this sounds so cool. And we were living in Colorado, and I just have always felt like there's a lot more cool history events and things out east, and this sort of proved it. And I wanted to bring that back to Colorado. So I came out here with the intent of seeing what it was all about, and then going back and setting one up in Colorado. So I talked to Lee. We came out here, talked to Lee, said, I want to do this in Colorado. And so we kind of got it set up and going, and that same year in November, we had our first History Camp Colorado.
So we do this around the room thing, right? So today, we did them after the kind of opening session. Well, here, when we were a little fewer in number, we did the whole room, right? So we went around the whole room, and people introduced themselves super quickly. And so, Carrie, what did you say when you introduced yourself?
I'm Carrie Lund, and I'm a history nerd.
As opposed to, I got on a plane and flew from Denver.
Well, yeah, but I found you afterwards and told you that. So I actually am very shy, so I don't like around the room kind of stuff usually. So that's probably why I did that. So I went back and I talked to a professor at the school that I had gone to and told her what I was trying to do. So she helped me get set up at a campus down there. And I started just emailing everyone I could find online, museums and historical reenactors and just anyone I could find that I could Google. And I put them on an email campaign and tried to get them a history camp. And that first year we had about 125 people, and this will be our 4th year this fall.
So one of the things that I found interesting, I've tried to go to the first one in each of the different sites, was a session that that surprised me when I saw it listed in the program. It's called the Brick Sewers of Denver. And I thought, well, that's interesting. That's probably not one we'd have. I don't know that we have brick sewers, but it was fascinating, and it was one of the most popular sessions that I think they had, right?
3 years later, people still make comments to me about that, and we're actually having that person come back this year and present.
She's a great presenter, and she also generated publicity about her talk in the newspaper in advance of History Camp. I went to another session, right, same History Camp, that had a couple of Revolutionary War reenactors, and they had their kit and so forth, and they did a really nice job, and it really was sparsely attended. Right? So obviously one of the things this reminded of us is some of the differences, right, in interest between the various locations. So we had History Camp Iowa, and then since then, 2016, 17, 18, History Camp Boston, Pioneer Valley, Colorado, Iowa. Now, this, I've shown this a couple of times. I have this framed on a wall. So I was contacted by a really nice lady who's a public history professor, and she said, we do these annual awards, and I'm kind of the coordinator for Massachusetts. The awards are the American Association for State and Local History, and I think that this History Camp thing is something that we should submit for an award. Now, mind you, there's no cap on the number of awards, and the criteria are all completely subjective. And we had, the first couple of years, I'd done some pretty extensive surveys and written up 100-plus page reports that talked about who came and why and what they liked and what they didn't and would they recommend their friends and lots of sorts of feedback. And so we supplied all of that, several hundred pages, and got back this response. So the rest of it's a form letter, right? And then there's this. And so, I regret to inform you, the committee appreciated that your program brings people together around the topic of history, but it felt that the program needed a framework to vet the presentations or facilitate discussions of the topics offered to ensure that the content represents good scholarship. And I mentioned that to John Bell, and John said, well, that means you're doing something creative. It's innovative, right? So the other thing, and this is not up here, but a friend of mine is at the Historical Society in Iowa, and that was one of the things that helped us get that facility. And I said to him, I said, Leo, you guys have done this, so what if we put in a talk, right? We'll submit a talk for ASLH for the annual conference. And my interest there was like spreading the word, right? That was the same way we had the award. It wasn't that we needed an award, it was I wanted to get it out to more people. And so we put in a, submitted something, right? And I said, what do you think our chances are? He says, I think they're pretty good because I'm the chair of the committee. And, and later, I didn't hear anything. And at some point, I pinged him, and he's like, didn't you hear? I said, no. He says, yeah. I said, no one else in the committee thought it'd be interesting to people. So that and that kind of told me that this is a different kind of thing, right? This is not something that if you're a traditionalist, if kind of the way things have always been done is to you a vital part of kind of who you are and how you think, what you think the future should look like, then that's probably not our audience, at least today, right? This, on the other hand, right, that is our audience. Thank you, Laurie. So here's where we are today, right? Largest, we've had 100 plus people, more this year than registered last year. You saw we're kind of straining at the seams in some ways with this great building. So the sessions, the number of folks registered, the sessions, and then we do these monthly behind-the-scene outings. This year, we're going to try to add History Camp Virginia. Now, you probably figured out that there was a close connection between Carrie moving to Virginia and the possibility of having History Camp Virginia. And one of the great things, Carrie's worked so much harder at this, both Colorado and now Virginia, than I ever have. And this is, just really did a fabulous job. So here's where we are, right? Spend a Saturday with some of the most interesting people in history. Now, just real quick. So when people ask what History Camp is, this is what I tell them, right? Organized by volunteers. People come with an open mind. You can present. There's no committee screening proposals. Your topic doesn't have to be tied to a theme, just history. Cost won't keep you from attending. We're trying to, right, always keep the cost as low as possible. You don't have to join an organization. If you love history, come. So our insights at a very high level are that there's a large community of folks who are interested in history, that they're also interested in a variety of topics. Sometimes when we do these new ones, there's somebody in the committee that says, well, we'll do them on our region, our city, or whatever, and I point out that the reason people come is because they're not just on your region or your city. That this gives people to come together in community, meet others who share their passion. People have told me I usually bore my friends here. I have other people that won't be bored. That there are really some outstanding speakers, and it provides a unique opportunity for adults. So if you're a kid, you know about things like National History Day, right? And you go to school and there's history classes and so forth. If you're an adult, where do you come together with others who share a passion for history? So our sense of what works. It's open to all, it's affordable. Hold on a Saturday rather. Has anyone been to the Massachusetts History Conference? I keep asking them, if you do something called the Massachusetts History Conference, why do you have it during the week? What? Why do you have it during the week? Their answer is people won't come if we do on the weekend. And really what they mean is that a lot of them are employees of historical sites, and so they don't think they'll come on the weekend. I think lots of people would come on the weekend. You can speak. That's a huge difference, right, between the idea of sending something in 9 months in advance and having a committee look through topics and so forth, or look through your presentation, and the variety of topics and variety of speakers. So the challenging thing is obviously scaling. And as I mentioned this morning, the way the money works for any of these is they run through a person's account. And I think in Iowa, they might have set up an organization to do that. I think in Springfield, they run it through maybe the History Museum there. But for Carrie and me, it's just timing credit card payment with the bill from the caterer and hoping it all works out, right? That is off-putting to most people when they call and say, we want to do history camp. So that's the challenge with adding new regions. I mentioned earlier this idea of Boston Bar Camp. So again, it's aimed at tech folks. And the reason that I started this was I went to that and I thought it was fabulous. I thought it represented the democratizing of information. And I talked to a friend of mine who organizes it, and I said, kind of, how do you do this, right? And we got to the topic of funding, and he said, well, we kind of suggest a certain amount of money, and people usually do that. And then he said, I just call up HubSpot, right, and this other company, and I say, we got a sponsor. And HubSpot writes a check for like $3,000, and then we have T-shirts. So I was like on my knees trying to get people these first couple of years to sponsor. And we were able to get like $500 from a publisher, right? We got maybe $100, $500. So those are the kind of dollar amounts that at a certain point you're just like, I'm just not even going to try, right? I mean, we're all volunteers doing this. So, we'll just focus on making the money work with the people who attend. So these are some of the cities, or states, regions that have contacted us about doing history camps. Philadelphia, Long Beach, the Adirondacks, Atlanta, St. Augustine, Dallas, Fort Worth, Minneapolis, Detroit. So three of those. In 3 cases, there was actually a second conversation. Usually the first one, right, is challenging for folks, and understandably so. The idea of organizing it and the financial piece. There are some folks that are kind of intrepid that are soldiering on, and we're going to see, how far they get. But as I mentioned this morning, I think it's clear that there's an appetite for this. I think we've kind of exhausted let's hope that more spring up across the country. It's pretty fabulous that there are, as many as there are. But if this is going to grow, and I think it'd be valuable if it did, then we need to figure out a way to get some additional resources. So the goals of potentially creating a nonprofit, raising money, are more history camps, more content shared online, and more recognition for people in local communities who are doing things to engage people with history, to raise up kind of awareness of history and so forth. That's the background. So would love to hear kind of thoughts, feedback, what you guys thought works. One of the things that I've felt with any new product, new service, new thing, is that you kind of have an idea, right? And you say, we're not going to do this by committee. We're going to have this idea, and we're going to put it out there, and we're going to do it a while, and then we're going to get input. So that's kind of where we are. So, after the first year, we did a feedback session, and somebody at the end said, I think there should be a keynote. And I'm thinking there's never going to be a keynote, right? That kind of goes against this basic idea. It was a fine suggestion just for a different kind of event. If we're going to continue to do history camp, I tend to think that the model pretty much works, but there needs to be actually a business model that allows us to raise money, have a bank account, and have some folks working on it. But that notwithstanding, would welcome any comments on history camp as a thing, and then history camp as potentially more around the country. Yes.
My question is for Carrie. I'm from Denver. Okay. And I was curious where you were.
So the first year we met on the Auraria campus in the Tivoli. The next year we were at Red Rocks Community College, and then last year we were at Arapahoe Community College in Littleton, and that's where we'll be again this year.
There's not I haven't lived there for a while, but there wasn't a lot of interest in the history of, there's a natural history, there's a history museum in Denver, or there was.
Yeah, there is, yes.
that I recall.
Right, which is part of the reason I wanted to bring this back there, because there are people like me who are hungry for that.
Are you from Denver too?
Yeah, I grew up there.
I grew up in Aurora.
Okay, I grew up in the Littleton area, and I am a history major, but I was working as a mortgage loan processor, which is very closely related to history. you know. And I really wanted a way to be more involved. And so when I saw this, I thought, you know what I loved is it's open to anyone. So I didn't have to be an official historian. I didn't have to belong to a certain group. I didn't have to have any sort of credentials. I could go and I could learn about history all day and I could enjoy it. And I thought, I know I'm not the only one here that feels that way, and that was why I wanted to bring it out. And one of our biggest challenges, I would say, is getting word out and telling people about it so that the people like you and I who really love this can hear about it, you know?
I think this is a good moment to make this leap with History Camp, because the traditional academic conference is breaking right now. Universities are all cutting back funding, getting money to travel to an expensive city. They have to be in big cities so that people can fly there. Then you have to get the hotel block, it's expensive. You got to get the convention, expensive. Schools aren't paying for it. I was just at the annual convention in Eugene, Oregon for the Society of Early Americanists, and there's just a depressing feeling around these kinds of conferences, like you feel like you're there because you need to do it for your career. I didn't feel like anybody there. Everyone stands and reads from their paper. That is a chapter from the book. And I didn't feel like anybody
By the way,
there.
that is real. I was blown away. It's like, I could do that at home.
And if you said to any of them, you can no longer work in history at a university, you're going to be a home mortgage processor, they would never touch that stuff again. They're doing it for their career. There's no passion. And if you're just there because you feel like you need to do it as a career investment and it's super expensive, you are dying for an alternative. And I think History Camp can remain an alternative. It doesn't have to turn into the new kind of academic conference, but there are lots of graduate students and adjunct faculty who cannot afford to go to these things, who study wide ranges of things, who would be interested to come. And then just the challenge is, aside from all the practical challenges of becoming a nonprofit, is to keep it where you don't come and read your paper, and just to relax people generally. Like, relax, come, talk about anything. And so I think it's a good moment to leap in, though it's not exactly clear all.
Right. Well, one of the things that I've noticed, attending, I just went to a conference in Virginia, and it was good, the speakers were good, but it was just sort of there, very staid, if you know what I mean. And I feel like the energy here is a lot different. People are so excited to be here. And every time I'm involved with a history camp, I have people come up to me and say, my brain is going to explode. There's so much information. It's wonderful. And there's just a different vibe here. And I think that kind of contributes to being a good alternative.
So I went to, just one quick story tagging on that. I went to the National Association of NHCP, Public Historians, right? Yeah. And I made the mistake that I thought public historians meant the public was involved and you're involved with the public. Otherwise, no, it's just an academic thing. And so it was in Milwaukee, and this is my experience. I was shocked, right? People were reading their papers, and I went to a session called "Come to this session if you've never been to this conference before," which is always a great idea, right? That's it. Many conferences do those. And so my question was, where are the handouts? And slides and download and so forth. And the answer was, well, there really aren't those. That lots of these things aren't finished. Now they may have been circulated amongst a small number of people, but they're really not not kind of finished. And I thought, in my world, stuff's never finished, right? If you are in TAC, you want other people to adopt your ideas, to build on the platforms, to make them better. Not, I better hold on to this because this is my one shot at like a tenure track, right? And then my next question was, there's probably a lot more people that want to come here than are able to come. So, is this live streamed? Is it recorded? And the answer was no, because if we did that, they wouldn't come. And I thought, now, the example I'm going to give is when I was, it was an expense account and so forth, but I've gone to conferences that cost like $3,000, and they are sold out because people want to be in the room. And those conferences are completely live streamed, right? Every single piece of them. So a backdrop to this. So we've got all this public history stuff happening, and I'm learning what public history means and doesn't mean. And the hotel it's in is the hotel where Teddy Roosevelt got shot and then spoke, right? And then finally got taken. Nobody mentioned that the entire time. I saw that in a display in the lobby. Okay, sorry, more comments. Yes?
I come at this with two hats. I mean, one as a perpetual attendee of history camp, because it's great. But I'm also vice president of one of those stodgy academic organizations, the Society for Industrial Archaeology. And we try and balance, it's an academic organization, but half the members are just enthusiasts. I think we'd be good enough to actually mention Teddy Roosevelt getting shot in our hotel, because we do actually stay in historic hotels when we can and get tours. Some of the sessions that are here would be right at home. I mean, the title, our conference is in early June, and you're having a whole session on, tidal mills, and the tidal mills of Boston, and you're doing that here. So there's overlap. One of the differences, we're dying and you're not. And I sort of urge you to, go out of your comfort zone and ride the wave. I'm sort of sitting here trying to figure out how I can take an old,
Sure.
that chronological member, old organization, and try and infuse some of this enthusiasm, because it's there in a whole lot of the attendees, but it's sort of organizationally snuffed out. And that's a real problem. You have more people here than we'll have at our conference in Chicago, and you're struggling with growth. And we're partnered with another organization in Chicago, which is sort of,
Right, I'm familiar with
the
it.
same realm as you, but does different things. But it's capturing a real bubbling enthusiasm, for history in the general population. So go for it.
Cool. You've gone to every single history camp, is that right?
And the Ignite.
That's right. Okay, I'll start over here and go left. Yeah.
Kind of bouncing off you two, I think there's a huge stigma that if you're not in the history field, if you don't have a degree in it, that you can't go to these conferences. Like, I've been a lifelong history buff, but my degree is not in history. And that's because my school didn't have the program that I wanted to go into. So I went to something, did something else. And I would go to all of these conferences if there wasn't that stigma that I had to have a degree, I had to be in the field. And like, when I found out about this, I was like, oh great, finally a conference that I go to that you don't have to have a degree. And all of my friends they're the same thing. They don't have the degree, and they went to something, or in history, they went to something else, and feel like there's that stigma that they can't do it. They're all like, well, tell us how this is, because we're gonna go, if it's as good as you think it's gonna be, we'll come next year.
Cool.
And I think if we get rid of that stigma, these conferences that are doing so bad, we'll be able to do them. Because like, I had no clue. I've done Hidden Chicago all the time because I'm from the suburbs of Chicago, and I love that organization. I think what they do is amazing. But I had no clue that they were part of this the conference.
You're going to learn more, I think, in just a few minutes. Thank you for speaking up and telling me. It was a little bit, when I introduced myself at that conference, you could just get a sense of like, you're not one of us, right? Nice to meet you. We'll not talk to you again. What? Yeah, real quick.
I'm not an archaeologist. So how I've become an officer of an academic archaeological association is just, it's kind of mind-blowing. For my sins, I'm being punished. But, there is a stigma,
Yeah. Sam, do you have something to say?
Lee, I think you're on to something here. Like, this is 21st century antiquarians. A century ago, antiquarians just liked history stories because they were fun, because they have ancestors, because they're celebrating their town, all kinds of reasons that actually still exist and are represented here. But you've automated some of this enthusiasm, taken concepts like the wiki concept of anybody coming up for topics. Some of us, like J.L. Bell or Wright and myself, actually do have some academic credibility because of the rigor of our scholarship. But we're not pitching to that audience, and I mean, like, deliberately not. And people in history camp have fun. So I don't want to diss academics. I mean, I have an adjunct appointment at the university, but the people are here because they have fun. I find that the open concept is actually self-policing to a degree.
Exactly.
I mean, the quality of the talks vary very widely, but people, think twice about coming up in front of a group and saying stuff without doing their own work.
Exactly.
And then there's a decided lack of the jargon that you often come up with in academia, et cetera, et cetera. So that I think you're onto something. I'm a big enthusiast.
I do. Thank you.
With this as far as it'll go. And you're also very experimental. You're trying things, and if it works, fine. And if it doesn't, just let it show.
Yeah. Thank you, Sam. Thank you. Yeah.
I come at this from a very different perspective of helping small nonprofits. And it seems to me the question you're asking is not the question that we're answering, but you're asking, assuming that this model, that this stuff works and that lots of other locations want it, how do we get there? So most of the discussion so far has been it's a good model. Great, but that doesn't help you get to setting up as a nonprofit. So I think the first question, if you're going to set up as a nonprofit, you've got to figure out what's the first thing you've got to solve. And the first thing I think you've got to solve is what's in it for the remote sites, for the new ones that you set up, and what's in it for the central site where you have the board of directors. And I can't quite figure out what those are. Clearly for the remote sites, there is an advantage having a central site for one-time startups, for the one-time startup. I can't figure out what's the advantage for the remote site of the central site after it's started up and
Sure.
running.
By the way, one clarification is the reason lunch will run really smoothly is because Carrie will just made sure it will run really smoothly. That's why she stepped down. So
Conversely, I can't figure out after you
Sure.
set up the guys, I can't figure out why the central site is important.
Right. So here's my thought on that. Realistically, the reason to do kind of the nonprofit is it's just straightforward financial resources, right? It's a business model essentially, and our pitch is going to be that for a whole litany of reasons we all know, our society, this is not a political comment, would be better off if more people knew more about history, right? And I think that that's probably a statement that we could say said decades ago and decades before that and so forth. If you look at the programs that are out there, there are programs around historic preservation, around certain existing institutions, and educating kids. I don't know of any institution or any organization or thing that's designed to help adults engage with this more. Beyond, a night class, an adult at a community college, and so forth. And I do, kind of what Carrie and I have concluded is that, and I think some of the comments here have reinforced it, that the format basically works. I think there's some value in kind of the brand, right? Some understanding, okay, what is History Camp? And so I'm not thinking about it so much as remote sites and so forth. I'm thinking about it as, once a year, Detroit, Minneapolis, and so forth. My expectation is that Boston would always be the largest. If that ends up not being the case, that's fine, right? Or Chicago, whatever. But I think it would be a different approach than where we've come from, which is, Danny, you've got a committee in Iowa, in Des Moines, and you're making that happen. really the others would be, we're going to find some local volunteers, but we'll use the web as a platform, use social media for outreach and so forth, and do them essentially like we've done Boston. And sorry.
Do them.
So
You do Detroit, and you get the speakers, and you do the
right.
Boston.
That's not been a problem. The only thing that physically matters, obviously, is the facility, and it's a non-trivial thing. But as I kind of said at the outset, I see one of the things we can do is we can use the platforms like the web to help communication and so forth. We've not had a problem. None of us meet with anyone before the event takes place, other than like the catering manager, right, and the facilities people.
Well, you
So,
talk about needing lots and lots of volunteers.
so the reality is, it's a little chaotic in the morning when the doors open and right before the doors open, but there's really not that many, right? So we're doing room managers, which is a fabulous concept, right, that we take elsewhere and so forth. This is not volunteer intensive. If there's anything, it's getting the word out. And that's one of the things we should have included in the slides. One of the biggest challenges here is just getting the ball rolling, because there's no one thing where you go out and be like, okay, there's where all the people are, right? And that's the whole reason this exists, is because there is no place already, right? And let's talk afterwards too, more about setting them up. Yes?
If you were to incorporate, then would you incorporate in Massachusetts?
Probably.
And then use something like Third Sector New England to be
Fiscal
our
agent, yep.
business manager?
Yeah. Or there's another organization that I've talked to about that too. Yep. Okay, good. Yes? Deacon.
I think that I agree with everyone who said that one of the great things about History Camp is the reducing that stigma, and anyone can come, anyone can present. The reason the presentations are rigorous is because you're getting up in front of people, not because your career is on the line, your tenure is on the line. But one of the things that I've noticed, and I've been an enthusiastic, if not perfect, attendance record attender of Boston History Camp, is that despite all of this great energy and great not being a stigma and great collaboration and people from different walks of life and professional backgrounds and all of that, we're still replicating some of the structural problems that academic history has, especially when it comes to structural issues around who is able to be in the room, who knows to be in the room. So as a group, we are whiter than the general population, more able-bodied than the general population, probably a little wealthier as a group than the general population because none of us had to work today, or maybe some of us did and took off from work or are working afterwards. But as a group, these are things that academic history is also struggling with. I don't think it's our job to solve that, but I do think that as a community, the people making History Camp happen and the people attending need to be conscious of doing what we can to not replicate that, because so far we are replicating it, and it's probably because of structural things, because there is the stigma and people don't know about it and say, okay, we'll send one friend, and if it's cool, we'll send more people the next time, and all of that. But I think that any conversation about how we scale up needs to be conscious of what that looks like in terms of structural stuff that we didn't start, but we're a part of in some way or another.
Okay, Laurie?
I just want to tag on to that. To me, when I think about, you're having a mission statement and scaling, it also seems like somehow to be scaling up from one event a year. If there's more than one event a year, and I've been pushing for this forever, there's less trouble of, well, it's this one day a year and I can't make it. Or there could be some kind of ongoing way for people to communicate and connect, and then there wouldn't be the push, relatively close into the conference of trying to let people know about it. An obvious community can spring up if you're scaled up to make that possible. And I know you don't want to do much more, than what you're already doing, which is having history camps, which is the great thing. But maybe other smaller get-togethers over the course of the year, just more ways to build that community, so that and more opportunities to speak at a history camp.
Sure. Let me get Robert right behind you. Yeah.
I'm adding on to all these things, these are good, and to what you said, when you were saying I'm on enthusiastic, for me it's history buff but outside of here, with also people being in the presenters living history almost with me and Sam for the Lexington Minutemen for like for like actually portraying it to the public. It's like there's the enthusiasm right there, and it's like if someone wants to know and like actually be a part of the history in the area, it's like it's a challenge.
Well, you know,
with the audience is like the people like getting older, like the portrayers, like some of them like passing away. It's hard to like retain the history and pass it on, but and trying to think about it for the modern age, it's always good and like getting everyone's opinion for like.
Right. So, you know, Robert, one of the things I've been hoping somebody would present on is kind of how to get into being an interpreter, right? Doing reenactments and so forth. Yes.
I was just going to add on to what Tegan said is when you begin to expand south, say Atlanta, I would think it would be imperative to have a more diverse presentations and, you know, to be more inclusive because you run a great risk.
Yeah. It's hard to be more inclusive than we are right now, right? Anyone can come, anyone can present. So the challenge we have is communication. Well, yeah, so the question is, so you got an all-volunteer organization which is running an event to break even, and we're selling out. So, you know, what more resources should we expend to get the word out to more people? Our hope is that the people come will tell their friends. And I agree with you that one of the challenges is, okay, you've got a certain circle of friends, right? But, you know, I guess my appeal would be if somebody looks, and I've had this comment in a previous one, you know, somebody said we should have somebody from, you know, a Native American organization. I'm like, great, contact them, right? I think that would be great. Without a doubt, those would be fascinating presentations. There's nothing special about me, you know, sending email to somebody, right? It could be anybody saying, hey, this thing exists, click on this link, learn more.
I have a comment about that too.
Yeah.
As I told you, I was a mortgage loan processor. I was not involved in the history world. So when I started, you can call it cold calling or whatever, but I emailed groups and they had no idea who I was. And now that we're into it in a few years into it in Colorado, the people who have connections in those groups that I couldn't reach, it's invaluable. So if you know someone, it's gonna mean a lot more actually if you reach out to them than if we just reach out and they go, yeah, I don't know who you are and what history camp's about. So that's why it's also really important to have other people reaching out as well.
One quick comment. So when I met Carrie and we were talking about this, she said, I'd like to do this, but I'm not a history person. I said, well, that's fine, I'm not either. And asked her what she did, and she said she's a mortgage loan processor. And I'm pretty familiar with the mortgage industry. I didn't think that through enough. And after a while, it dawned on me, it's like, that is a fabulous background and skill set for running an event, right? People are undependable, but man, stuff's gonna happen that day, right? And there's money involved, and people, it is a fabulous background. If, on the other hand, Carrie would have said, I have spent the last 17 years in an academic setting, we would have a different kind of conference than we have right now. And it would still have not taken place. It'd be some point in the future. Margie?
I've always had the trouble with the word history in history camp. When we were going around the room, the first thing I said was, I'm Margie Hilton, and I'm very interested in ancient Mesopotamian history. That's my field. And then I thought, oh my God, not here. So I better tell them that I really work in the archives in Weston. Because I keep thinking that you are aiming for Boston history. So if I said, okay, I'd like to do a thing on Gilgamesh, yeah. So there you go. What's history?
Okay. Fair enough. Okay, was there one other comment? Oh, Jeff, I'm sorry.
Yeah, there's been a lot of emphasis on getting the word out, and I understand that you're trying to expand geographically. What do you see going on for Boston? I mean, if we get the word out and 2,000 people want to show up, is that what you're aiming for?
That would be cool.
So
it could happen if you're talking about getting the word out. I mean,
yeah. So no, that's exactly right. So yeah, so that's exactly right. So this is a fabulous venue, right? It is really a great place in every respect. It is also, you know, capacity limited, right? We couldn't double the size, right now, and that would only take us to you know, in terms of attendees, maybe like 700, something like that. So you know, one thought is that perhaps there's here, and perhaps in a few other cities, a much larger event. But in a Denver, an Atlanta, a St. Augustine, a Santa Fe, yeah, that it's perhaps a smaller event. I've talked with a few folks. I do feel, as somebody who's not a native, but who's come here, and you know how that is sometimes when you've moved to an area, you have a different view, maybe appreciate things somewhat differently than people who've just, you know, grown up around them. I think there's an opportunity for us here in this region to have a lot more people here, whether or not it's at a history camp or something. I mean, you know, we know about things like Comic-Con and things like that, right? Why isn't there a place that once a year, people from all across the country that have a passion for history have like marked on their calendar, like, I'm gonna try to go, you know? So, you know, there's that kind of step function, right? How do you go from a facility like this to realistically, you know, a hotel/convention center and so forth, and the costs just blow up at that point. It's really challenging, and the blow up is not, it's not so much fixed costs as variable costs. So you add more people, the per person cost, right, is still really high.
Okay, so this is my first time coming.
Thank you.
And what brought me here was several things. I got an email over a year ago about last year, but I already had a commitment, so I couldn't be two places at once. Not unusual in my life. And number two are the choices of what people presented. None of the particular pieces that I have an interest in, what I would call staunchy. Eleanor Roosevelt, not staunchy. They're about people, they're about just interests that people have that are not necessarily something that a college would allow to happen to fill the lecture hall. But people have a lot of personal interest, that's their specialty. And so I've been to the American Historical Association convention, okay, over the years, or the Organization of American Historians. But I've also gone to the New England Association, New England Historical, okay, or the History Studies, which is basically history teachers, which is what my background is. It's these things that are appealing to individuals who have, and we come because we have a curiosity. We're all curious about something that it makes it worth our day to spend. And there are some really interesting things, and in some cases, I could be two places at the same time here. The venue is nice. It gives you a sense of enough room for it. I don't know what the max that you could potentially have. And the fact that in many cases, it's going to be a very regionalized interest.
Right.
If I live in St. Augustine, Florida, nice place, chances are I'm not interested deeply in Tombstone, Arizona.
Right.
And so the people who are likely to come will be from the southeast and not necessarily from Tombstone, Arizona, unless there's a topic. So I think there's a real important need for a regionalistness of history of those small pieces. And yes, if I was a presenter and my interest was in the Native Americans who died at Tombstone, and I know there's going to be one in that area, I may submit and say, gee, I turned it into a vacation tax deduction. So I think that the different places, they will have different flavors.
But they definitely do. They
So
definitely do.
one quick comment on that, and then we should break and get to lunch. I'm waiting for the folks in St. Augustine and Santa Fe to say, you guys in New England think you've been around a while? Thanks very much.